In the summer of 1923, on a farm outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, a small community in the heart of Lancaster County, an Amish grower pulled the first ripe tomatoes of the season from plants he had not watered once since transplanting. Not once. The soil was dry on the surface. The sky had not opened in 11 days, and those tomatoes were the size of a man's fist, deep red all the way through, with the kind of concentrated sweetness that modern grocery store varieties have not tasted like in 40 years. A neighbor watching from the fence post asked him how. The old man looked back and said something that would take another 100 years to fully understand. The plant does not need your water. It needs to learn to find its own. That question, how does a tomato plant thrive without irrigation in the dry heat of a Pennsylvania summer, is going to be answered completely before this video ends. But the answer is not what you think it is. And the reason you have never been told this before has less to do with ignorance and more to do with money. Here is what the next few minutes are going to do. They're going to take you back to the actual documented practices of Amish farming communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Holmes County, Ohio, and LaGrange County, Indiana communities that have grown tomatoes continuously for over 2 centuries without a single irrigation line, without a drip system, without a moisture meter, without a $400 soaker hose setup. And then they're going to show you exactly what happened in American agriculture that made everyone forget this was possible. Because something did happen, something specific, something with a date and a name behind it. Think about your grandfather's garden for a moment. If he was growing in the 1940s or 1950s, there was a reasonable chance he never ran a hose to his tomatoes either, not because he was lazy, because he knew something about soil and root behavior that the companies selling you irrigation supplies have a direct financial interest in making sure you never rediscover. Start with what the Amish actually do, because this is not a rumor and it is not a folktale. Donald Craybill, a professor at Elizabethtown College who has spent decades studying Amish agricultural communities in detail, documented in his research that Amish farming philosophy centers on what he described as working with natural systems rather than overriding them. That phrase is worth sitting with. Not fighting nature, not supplementing nature, working within it. And nowhere is that philosophy more visibly demonstrated than in how Amish farmers in Lancaster County prepare their tomato beds long before a single plant goes into the ground. The preparation begins in late winter or very early spring, not in May when most American gardeners are finally dragging their tomato starts to the raised bed. In February, sometimes as early as January in a mild year, an Amish grower in Holmes County is already thinking about the structure of the soil his tomatoes will grow in. He is adding aged manure, horse manure primarily, from the same animals that pulled his plow in quantities that would strike a modern gardener as almost excessive. Not a thin layer turned in at planting time. Deep incorporation, weeks in advance, allowing the microbial community in the soil to begin breaking material down and restructuring the physical architecture of the ground itself. And here is where the mechanism starts to become clear. Because what that composted organic matter does to soil structure is something that every irrigation system in the world is trying to imitate artificially. Fully composted organic material, and we are talking material that is broken down for months, not bagged compost from a garden center, creates what soil scientists call macropores and micropores in the soil profile. The macropores allow air and water to move. The micropores hold water at the capillary level, meaning the soil physically grips moisture and releases it slowly to plant roots over days and weeks, not hours. When you water a conventionally prepared garden bed, most of that water moves through and drains away, or sits at the surface and evaporates. When an Amish farmer's deep composted bed receives rain, that bed holds the moisture the way a sponge holds water, releasing it gradually, over time, at precisely the depth where tomato roots are searching. Now, here is what the industry spent decades hoping you would never figure out. That effect, deep moisture retention through organic matter, is not complicated. It is not patented. It does not require a purchase. It requires time, animal manure, and the willingness to prepare soil months before you plant. None of those things generate revenue for a corporation. And when the modern American garden supply industry built itself in the post-war decades, the entire structure of the market was designed around selling you a solution to a problem that would not exist if your soil had been properly built in the first place. If you have a garden and you are tired of being told what to buy to fix what the previous product broke, drop the number 47 inches, the comments below, or better yet, drop the state you are gardening in. Let us see how many of us are actually out there, from Pennsylvania to Oregon, Ohio to Tennessee, all working on the same piece of ground and all getting sold the same bill of goods. Here is where the historical record gets genuinely uncomfortable for some powerful people. The post-war fertilizer industry did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged directly from the conversion of munitions manufacturing. After World War II ended in 1945, American chemical plants that had spent years producing nitrogen compounds for explosives suddenly needed a new market for their output. Ammonium nitrate, which had been a key component in wartime explosives, was rebranded almost overnight as a crop fertilizer. The technology already existed. The manufacturing capacity already existed. What did not yet exist was the cultural consensus that synthetic fertilizer was necessary or desirable. That consensus had to be built, and it was built deliberately through county extension offices, through USDA outreach programs, through university agricultural departments that received significant funding from chemical industry interests throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Farmers who had been managing their soil fertility through animal manure, green manuring, and crop rotation for generations were told through official government channels that modern chemistry had made those methods obsolete. The word used, and this appears in documented agricultural extension literature from that era, was inefficient. Your grandfather's method was called inefficient, not because it did not work. It worked for 2 centuries, but because it could not be sold. Earl Butz, who served as Secretary of Agriculture under Nixon and Ford in the early 1970s, made the logic of that era explicit when he reportedly told farmers to get big or get out. His agricultural policies, actively documented by agricultural historians, accelerated the consolidation of American farming and deepened the dependency on synthetic inputs that the post-war chemical companies had spent 2 decades building. Small growers who kept organic practices were squeezed out not because their methods were inferior, but because the economic structures surrounding them had been redesigned to favor scale and chemistry over knowledge and soil health. The Amish watched all of this from the outside, literally from the outside. Their communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in Holmes County, Ohio, and in LaGrange County, Indiana, maintained their separation from the electrical grid, from government subsidy programs, from the county agent system that was driving chemical adoption everywhere else. That separation, which many observers interpreted as stubbornness or backwardness, turned out to be an accidental form of preservation. While conventional American agriculture underwent a complete chemical transformation between 1945 and 1975, Amish farmers kept composting, kept using their horses, kept rotating their crops, kept building their soil the same way their great-grandparents had built it. And if you think that separation did not produce measurably different results, consider what a 73-year-old Amish farmer in Holmes County, Ohio, told a researcher visiting his operation in the late 1990s that his soil had never been tested for deficiency in his lifetime or his father's lifetime before him because the animals, the rotation, and the composting took care of what the soil needed. His tomatoes went in dry and came out bearing. The idea of running irrigation to them would have struck him, he said, the same way running electricity to his barn would have struck him. Not because he could not imagine it, because he did not need it. But the part they really did not want you to know comes next. Because the no watering practice the Amish use is not just about moisture retention in the soil. It is also about how the tomato plant itself develops when it is not given easy water access at the surface. This is where the biology becomes genuinely striking. When a tomato seedling is transplanted into deeply composted, moisture-retaining soil and is not surface watered, the plant responds to the absence of surface moisture by driving its roots downward. Plant physiologists have documented this response. It is called hydrotropism, the growth of roots toward moisture, and it is one of the most powerful natural mechanisms in a tomato plant's development. A tomato plant that is regularly surface watered has no reason to develop a deep root system. The water is always right there, at the surface. The roots stay shallow. The plant becomes dependent on you and on your hose. A tomato plant that is transplanted into properly prepared ground and then left to find its own moisture drives roots down 6 inches, 8 inches. In loose, deeply composted soil, tomato roots have been documented reaching 12 to 14 inches of depth. At that depth, the plant is drawing from a moisture reservoir that surface heat and evaporation cannot touch. A week without rain barely registers to a plant drinking from 14 inches down. 2 weeks of dry weather that would wilt a conventionally irrigated tomato, because that plant never learned to reach, does almost nothing to the Amish-grown plant whose root system has been building since transplant day. What the Amish discovered about this is going to change how you see your garden, because this means that every time you run your garden hose over your tomato plants on a warm afternoon, you are not helping them. You are training them to be dependent. You are preventing the root behavior that would make them resilient. The water you are providing is the same thing as the synthetic fertilizer that replaced animal manure. It solves a short-term, visible problem while creating a deeper, invisible dependency. And the companies that sell you the hoses, the drip systems, the timers, the moisture monitors, none of them have any interest in telling you that the best thing you can do for a tomato plant is leave it alone to find its own strength. If you have not subscribed to this channel yet, take a moment to do it now. Every week we come back to this same territory, the methods the industry buried, the wisdom the Amish communities kept alive, and the food independence that most Americans gave up without fully realizing what they were surrendering. You will not find this in a seed catalog. You will not hear this from a county extension office. This is the record that gets kept alive by people like you. Now, here's the question that was opened at the beginning of this video, and here is where the full answer arrives. The Amish farmer outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania in 1923 was not doing something mystical. He was doing something his grandfather had taught him, and his grandfather's grandfather before that, going back to the Swiss and German farming communities these families descended from in the 18th century. He was planting into a soil so deeply enriched with composted organic matter, so thoroughly structured to hold and release moisture from depth, that the tomato plant dropped into it had everything it needed already waiting underground. And the plant, receiving no water at the surface, did exactly what tomato plants are biologically designed to do when conditions are right. It sent its roots down to find what it needed, and it built itself into something that could survive a dry Pennsylvania August without a single drop from your hand. The tragedy of what was lost between 1945 and 1975 is not just the method. The method still exists. You can still build that soil. The tragedy is the confidence. The belief that you, as a grower, knew enough. That your grandfather's garden, which never had a drip system or a moisture sensor, was producing because of something real that he understood. What the post-war agricultural industry replaced was not just the manure with synthetic nitrogen. It replaced the grower's authority with product dependency. It told your grandfather, in the language of modernity and science and progress, that he did not know what he was doing. And the generation that came after him believed it. There are Amish farms in Holmes County, Ohio, operating today on soil that has never received a pound of synthetic fertilizer. According to records maintained by Amish community observers and agricultural researchers who have visited these operations, the continuous composting and rotation practices have produced topsoil depths in some cases exceeding 16 inches, at a time when the national average agricultural topsoil depth in the United States has declined, according to USDA soil surveys, to somewhere between 5 and 7 inches. 5 to 7 inches. 200 years of industrial agriculture, and the soil that feeds this country is less than half a foot deep. The Amish, without a subsidy, without a chemical company rep, without a county agent telling them what to buy, are sitting on 16 inches of living black topsoil that holds water like a reservoir and grows tomatoes that nobody needs to irrigate. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between a food system that belongs to you and one that belongs to whoever manufactures the next input you cannot do without. That is the difference between a garden that works in a drought year and one that dies the moment you forget to turn on the hose. And it is a difference that was manufactured not by accident, not by necessity, but by the economic logic of an industry that needed you to be dependent in order to have a customer. And this is the moment everything changed for understanding what we actually lost. Because the Amish practice of not watering tomatoes is not, in the end, about tomatoes. It is about a philosophy of farming that says the grower's job is to prepare the conditions and then trust the plant. It says that a living soil built over years with animal matter, with patience, with rotation and rest and time is more powerful than any product in any catalog. It says that dependency is not efficiency. It is just dependency with a price tag. Your grandfather probably knew this, not as a philosophy, as a fact. He saw it in his garden every summer. He watched his tomatoes come in dry years and wet years and years when the hose was always somewhere else being used for something more urgent. He did not have the vocabulary for hydrotropism or micropore structure, but he had the results, and the results told him that a plant in good ground takes care of itself. Somewhere between his generation and yours, that knowledge got replaced by a subscription, by a product, by a system that profits from your doubt about whether you are doing it right. You can do it right. The method is not lost. It is being kept alive in plain sight on farms in Lancaster County and Holmes County and LaGrange County by communities who never signed up for the program that told the rest of America its old ways were not good enough. The soil can be rebuilt, not in a season, but in 2 or 3, with composted organic matter applied deeply and allowed to do its slow structural work. The tomato plant you put in that soil next spring will reward your patience in a way that no drip timer ever will. The last thing worth saying about all of this is this: what it means about America, that we traded 200 years of accumulated soil knowledge for a bag of synthetic inputs, and a hose attachment is a question that goes well beyond the garden, but it starts in the garden. It starts in the ground under your feet, and recovering that ground, not just the soil, but the understanding, the confidence, the independence, starts with knowing what was taken and choosing to take it back. Leave a comment below and tell us what your grandfather grew in his garden. Tell us what method he used that you only half remember, that you have been meaning to try again for years. Or tell us what your family lost when the supermarket replaced the root cellar and the seed catalog replaced the seed tin on the kitchen shelf. We read every one. If this video opened something up for you, give it a like. Share it with someone who still thinks they have to buy their way to a good tomato. Because the Amish have been proving for 200 years that the best things in a garden cannot be purchased. They have to be built with patience, with knowledge, and with the kind of trust in living soil that nobody can sell you and nobody can take away.